Ladies and gentlemen, now it's too late with Alan Mosley.
Guys, welcome back for another episode of It's Too Late. I am your host, Alan Mosley, joined again this week by the number one producer in late night, Sherry Voluntary. Sherry, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
You feeling all right? You doing good?
Yeah, doing great. Nice day, so doing good.
Yeah, it is a nice day. So the Ice Age is already over. So like this past weekend, I literally couldn't go anywhere and couldn't order any food because it's crazy. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. I went out to go clear the snow and ice off of Anna Kay's car, and of course, under the cars you can still see the pavement because the car hasn't moved. So I actually measured it. I swear to God, I've lived in Tennessee almost my whole life. I don't think we've ever had more than maybe 4 inches. Like if we had 4 inches of snow, that was a monumental for us.
Right. In Middle Tennessee, yeah.
In Middle Tennessee, in southern Middle Tennessee at that.
Yeah.
It was right at about 9.
Ooh.
Can you believe that?
That's a lot.
It is a lot. So it's gone now, and it was and now fast forward to today, it was 70 degrees. Because that's how we roll down here in Tennessee.
Tennessee weather.
But and we were talking about earlier in the show that Tennessee weather being what it is, we're almost to March, and by the time you get to like March, April, early May, you could still theoretically have like a little bit of an ice storm. You could also have 85-degree weather.
Right.
Like we've already moved on psychologically to the great dawn of spring.
It's like a hormonal woman, the weather in Tennessee.
Yes.
I know.
Tennessee is like a hormonal woman, like Sherry.
Exactly.
You've heard it here first. Guys, I'll tell you another thing that's coming up. It's the live show for 2021. It's the It's Too Late live show. That's March 20th. That's less than a month away.
I know. Wow.
A month away. Oh, it's getting close to that time where now I have to actually do the show.
Yeah, I think we should start planning it.
We should start planning the show now. Guys, that's March 20th, but you got to get tickets because space is limited. They're only $10. We did this last year for the episode 100. Episode 100 is too late. We had such a great time. There were so many awesome, like-minded, liberty-loving people there. We all had a great time. You got to come to March 20th for the It's Too Late 2021 live show. You can get your tickets. We have an Eventbrite page for it. We're not going to be operating a door, by the way. So I'm gonna go on a quick little tangent just here really quick. So we're not operating a door, and the key reason we're not operating a door is we're recording a program. It's a live show. We're gonna set up.
Correct.
We're gonna do the whole thing. It'll be episode 150 about that time. And so we can't have people just strolling in and out of the studio when we're recording. So I mean, it's not that big of a studio.
Yeah.
So you'll hear it. It'll be a big distraction. So I mean, like we're locking you guys in.
Yeah.
The gates are locked. You are stuck in there. Like imagine this, guys. You pay me $10, and then I tie you to a chair, and you have to watch It's Too Late with Alan Mosley for like an hour.
You need one of those little cartoon villain mustaches.
Yeah, I know. Like, well, I mean, and now that I've sold it like that, like, how could anyone say no? But it's going to be great. There's going to be a lot of fun people there. But the reason I was going to go on a tangent is we also have a live musical. And we had a live musical guest for episode 100. We have a new musical guest for episode 150. And so same thing goes for the band and their fans as fans of our show is you got to get your tickets ahead of time because space is limited and we're not operating a door. That's just dims the brakes. So do it. Go to facebook.com/Alan Mosley TV. Click on events. There it is. You can also go to my website, alanmosley.tv. So now that we got our business out of the way.
Yeah.
The gaffe machine that is our new president, Joe Biden. Now, far be it for me, ladies and gentlemen, to accuse a guy who famously publicly campaigned with a high-ranking member of the KKK to say something racist. But you'll be surprised to know that that's exactly what he did. At his town hall in Milwaukee, guys, take a look at this clip right
A lot of people don't know how to register. Not everybody in the community, in the Hispanic and the African American community, particularly in rural areas that are distant and or inner city districts know how to get online to determine how to get in line for that COVID vaccination at the Walgreens.
Now, this is me trying to be as fair and honest as I can, balanced as I can possibly
Like
be.
Fox News over there.
Yeah, like Fox News. I mean, you know me.
Mm.
I'll be willing to give you, random lefty person, the benefit of the doubt that didn't come off the way he intended.
Right.
That he was trying to make a point about this whole, equity of the vaccine rollout and helping reach, disproportionately affected communities and all that. I'll give you that if you're also willing to admit that if Donald Trump had said the exact words he just said, you guys would have never let the right-wing establishment hear the end of it. Tell me I'm wrong about that.
You are not wrong. I mean, Trump said far less than that, and they were finding racism where it wasn't even at. So, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I love some of the
know how to-
lefties. Get that out of here. I love some of the lefties who have admitted that, we spent the last 4 years talking about a fake racist,
Right.
and we replaced him with a real one. Like, leave it up to the Democratic Party. Am I right?
Ah, beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
I want to say really quick before we take our first commercial break, in that clip, he had that little line of, they don't know how to get online to get in line for vaccines. And, in his mind, he was probably thinking, hey, good one, Joe. That was a good zinger. Go online to get in line.
Right.
It's so the disconnect between where his mushy Jello brain is and where the rest of us are, that he probably thought he really hit a home run in that moment. But in reality, he said something that racial undertones there.
Dicey.
Yeah, a little dicey, a little dicey, as our friend Ben used to say. But we don't have a lot more time to him-haw. We got to move on to Meme of the Week and Viewer Mail, specifically because we have a guest tonight. We have a guest, the Senior Education Fellow for the Foundation of Economic Education, FEE. That is Carrie McDonald. Is going to be our guest later on in the show this evening. So we're going to move on to the Meme of the Week and the Viewer Mail. We'll be back right after this. Don't go away. Hey, Sherry.
Yes.
What time is it?
Meme of the week.
Joe Biden checking to see if you know how to use the internet.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
If you don't want us making fun of your gaffes, then just don't say overtly racist things.
Right. It'd be a good idea.
Just don't do it. Just don't. Well, we're already out of time. Let's go ahead and answer some viewer mail.
All right.
It's time for viewer mail. Andrew Avery writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, why did they throw me out of the corporate professional behavior mandatory training just for asking if harass was one word or two?
Oh. Racy.
This is particularly risque for Andrew, I think.
Yes, correct.
I feel like he feels like he can push the envelope a little bit. We have done a poor job of communicating to Andrew what he can and can't get away with.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is Andrew, this is our fault. Celeste Annis writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, who was your favorite childhood pet? Sherry, what was your favorite childhood pet?
I'm gonna go with my little sister.
I'm sure she appreciates that.
Yeah. I mean, she used to be my favorite.
Used to be. Oh, used to be. Used to be.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna pick an actual like household pet animal and not a human being. So we had this cat named Bobby, and Bobby was a black cat, and he was Bobby. Give me a freaking break. I didn't name him. Okay, I didn't name him. And he was a chatty cat. Chatty cats are the best.
Yes.
They really are. And this is actually something that's really interesting. Did you know that? So scientists have said that cats meow. They don't go out through the wild and meow at each other. They meow specifically to humans because they're trying to communicate with you.
Right. It's so sweet. I love it when they talk. Have little conversations.
This has become a very warm and fuzzy episode. I like that.
Yeah.
Adam Sakozin writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, car, truck, or SUV? Sherry, car, truck, or SUV?
I'm gonna say SUV.
Why an SUV?
You know, I got kids and crap, and I don't know. I like a truck, but I want my stuff covered and toting people around and stuff. It works out.
Kids and crap.
Yeah, kids and crap.
Why do you hate the environment?
I have a
No,
list.
no. I'm just going to stop you right there. Your Joker laugh following that question is all the audience needs to know. Clay Davis writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, is space exploration better off in NASA's hands or Elon Musk's?
I mean, the private sector would be the best place for it, but
So I'm not going to be a pedant and try to give an answer that Clay didn't offer. It was one or the other. So out of those
Elon
two,
Musk.
out of those two, the answer is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
NASA should just not exist.
Right.
However, I also just want to take this token opportunity to point out that Elon Musk has received like tons of subsidies. He's a welfare whore, just
Correct.
like lots of corporatists are. And he's taken tons of government contracts and subsidies for batteries and electric vehicles and stuff. So miss me with that worshiping Elon Musk private business type stuff. Rachel Watson Killery writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, would you rather lose electricity in the winter or the summer?
Oh, I'm gonna go with the summer because I hate to be cold. That's it.
You rather lose electricity in the summer because you hate to be cold.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, what?
I'd rather burst into flames.
Okay. So this is very similar to a question like we had like a week or two ago where someone asked, would you rather be too hot or too cold?
Right.
So I would rather lose electricity in the winter because you can always like build a fire or get warm. Whereas I can't, like, I gotta have an air conditioned environment. I gotta,
You're
like,
tender.
yeah, I gotta have, it's gotta just be 72. On a random side note, the commercial before this segment is the 10th Amendment Center commercial. And I noticed during the break that Michael Bolton had posted on social media a picture of like the sunny outdoor LA that he's currently walking around in.
Correct.
And a picture of a screenshot of his phone where it's 78. And he says, if only it were just a few degrees cooler.
Shut up, Bolden.
Yeah. Okay, so last one. Lyle Durio writes, Dear Alan and Sherry, do you gamble? Sherry, do you gamble?
Only a little bit. I'm kind of cheap, but I have started playing Texas Hold'em and in tournaments, and you have to buy in. So, yeah,
So you're getting into the whole Texas Hold'em thing.
a little bit.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I've told people, like, so I went to college in the early 2000s, and that was like when Texas Hold'em, what was the World Series of Poker? The World
Yeah.
Series of Poker was like on ESPN all the time. Like it was kind of like it was a craze. It was a fad.
Right.
And so all the bros in the dorms were playing Texas Hold'em. And I got into that a little bit. And it was fun. Of course, we were all broke college students. You know, we're
Right.
playing with change, you know.
Right.
And, you know, it was fun and all that. But, you know, despite it being entertaining, I didn't really get into it like this is something I want to pursue.
Sure.
I have done some sports gambling. I haven't actually for our friends at the IRS, but I have done some sports gambling. I used to write the column for Sports Ball, the Allen's Sunken Cost Money Pit, where I would
Right.
give my picks for that week. I like sports betting more because, like I give the analogy of if you're playing the slots, you're pulling the lever,
Right.
and it really just boils down to how much money do you feel like losing before you quit.
Right. No strategy
Yeah.
at all.
Whereas with sports betting, you're making an educated guess. It's
Right.
not just, of course, things can happen. Of course, the
Right.
star QB can break his arm. Of course, they can have a bunch of turnovers and the ball, you can kick a field goal and the ball hits the upright. Of course, things can happen. But in general, you at least have data to inform your selection
Right.
as opposed to it being pure chance. So sports gambling is I've enjoyed that. I've had a lot of success with that, except for I've never won any money, IRS.
Right.
I've never won any money doing it.
Just won
Uh,
good feelings.
yeah. Just good. I've just won good feelings. It's exactly right. All right, well we're already out of time. So we do have some more viewer mail, but we don't have time to get to it, which is a rarity for us. We
Right.
usually answer all the viewer mail, but we can't answer all the viewer mail this week because we
A classy.
we have a classy, awesome guest.
Yeah.
We will be right back after this break with Carrie McDonald from Fee. Don't go away. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for It's Too Late with Alan Mosley. Email us at info@alanmosley.tv. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Welcome back. Our guest this evening is a senior education fellow at FEE, that's the Foundation of Economic Education, as well as the author of Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside of the Conventional Classroom. She's also an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute and a regular Forbes contributor. Carrie McDonald, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Well, I was telling you right before we went on that we haven't had as many guests as I would like, and I'm very appreciative of you taking the time to be with us because education. It's funny, we had an AMA on this program, and a lot of people that are in our audience are very aware of the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and that's a lot of times that's their number one hot topic issue of if I had a magic wand and I could affect change, I would target the Fed, and while I believe I understand that, and I believe that that's a very important issue. I often tell people, I'll tell you what, I'll break with you on this one thing. My biggest issue is education. I feel like if we had more educational opportunities outside of the purview of government schools, then we might see a lot of positive change affected in a lot of other areas unrelated to education. It could be involved with Fed, it could be involved with government spending. A lot of civics and policy issues might be positively affected if you had more independent educational opportunities. Does that sort of ring a bell with you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the silver linings, if there is any, to come out of the last year, is that more parents are getting a much closer look at what's happening in their children's schools, in particular government schools, and realizing that they may not like what they're seeing. I think parents last spring, when the school shutdowns first began, and most classrooms went remote, families for the first time in many cases had a chance to really see the kinds of curriculum that their kids were getting in these schools. Even anecdotally, I heard from parents saying, gosh, I heard this teacher reading a book to the class that my child had read to herself 2 years prior. And so they really started to get a closer look at what was happening, and in many cases not liking what they saw. And then I think the pandemic response has really opened up so many more opportunities for parents to look elsewhere, to exit the government schooling system, to see, in full color the influence of the teachers unions on government schools. There's been an exodus of parents removing their children from government schools for private education, both private schools, parochial schools, and homeschooling across the country. And so I think these are sort of the trends that will continue, hopefully, even after the shutdowns, lockdowns, and the pandemic response ends.
Well, let me circle back here. So for folks that are not as familiar with you as they should be, so I've heard a great amount of content from you that sort of focuses on identifying the passions of children and sort of using that as a guide towards their education rather than the compulsory model of government schools. So first things first, tell our audience a little bit about yourself, Carrie McDonald, and how education and alternatives like homeschooling, unschooling became your passion.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the senior education fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, which is the country's oldest free market libertarian think tank, founded in 1946. This is our 75th year anniversary, and really focus on kind of the libertarian response to policy and painting the vision of the principles for a free society, including limited government, free markets, individual liberty, and peace. My pathway specifically toward education and alternatives to school, and private education as well, really began when I was in college. So I went to K to 12 public schools, and hadn't really thought much about education. Went to college, was an economics major, but became increasingly interested in education from the lens of economics, really, and seeing at the time, this was in the late 1990s, how few choices parents had around their children's education. I mean, we think still a lot of choices are limited for families, and luckily the school choice movement has grown substantially in recent years and has really taken off over the past year. But there was even less choice really a couple of decades ago, and that was striking to me. Sort of looking at this government monopoly system of compulsory schooling. So I started taking more of an active interest in education and took an education class my senior year in college, and had a chance to shadow a homeschooling family. Um, and homeschooling was completely new to me. This was, again, in the late 1990s. Homeschooling had just become legally recognized in all 50 states just a few years prior, by the mid 1990s. So it was still a relatively new phenomenon, definitely not the kind of mainstream option that it has become. And I remember walking into this family's kitchen for the first time to shadow them for the semester, and being completely captivated by what I saw. Just this curious child. At the time, she was a second grader, articulate, interesting, creative, authentic socialization into the people, places, and things of her community, really learning from the people around her in an authentic way. And it was in stark contrast to that same semester when I was doing a student teaching practicum at a local public elementary school, the same age kids, second graders. And really, now for the first time in black and white, I had seen this contrast between the kind of government schooling, compulsory coercive system that I had gone through, that most of us have gone through,
Hmm.
and a completely other way of being educated, this alternative to school, not replicating school at home, but really this kind of child-centered, child-directed approach to education that was not focused on sort of the conformity and standardization and age segregation and all of those, ideas that we associate with compulsory schooling. So I was hooked, and then that triggered my further interest in education. I went to graduate school in education policy at Harvard. At the time, if you were interested in anything kind of beyond conventional schooling, the place for you was charter schools, which were relatively new at the time, the turn of the millennium.
Hmm.
So I spent some time, working with public policy institutes on expanding charter schools and kind of the emergent school choice movement. And then, always knew that for my own children that we would be doing something likely different than compulsory schooling, just from that experience. So that when I became a mom and was really looking for education options for my own children, We're here in Boston, Massachusetts, and I realized that if I had sent them to school, in this case, even a private school, that their learning would contract, that they would end up spending their days with the same age segregated group of kids and the same static handful of teachers in the same building every day, as opposed to really this immersive learning experience that they had learning in and through the city and all of the kind of classes and experiences and mentors that they were developing relationships with. And so it really seemed like in order to expand their learning and provide them with this robust, dynamic education, that it would be best to do that, at least for our family, outside of a conventional classroom.
Now, I want to expound upon something you said a little bit before we do a deep dive into sort of the age of COVID. So you had said, remind me, it was 1999 that was all 50 states were recognized for homeschooling?
No, so homeschooling became legally
Okay.
recognized in all 50 states by the mid
Okay.
1990s.
Okay.
There were various levels of legalization prior to that. In some cases, states had, it was illegal to homeschool. In other cases, it was just not well defined legally.
Okay.
So by the mid 1990s, all of those wrinkles were ironed out, and it was legally recognized that you, as parents, were able to homeschool your children in all 50 states.
So, I mean, that's, historically, I mean, that's not even a breath ago that even becomes more nationally recognized. So before we do that deep dive into the age of COVID, talk to us a little bit about sort of what trajectory homeschooling and the school choice movement was on, prior to, say, 2020. Was homeschooling already sort of naturally growing and becoming more mainstream?
Yeah, so the modern homeschooling movement really began in earnest in the late 60s, early 1970s, and it really came from the progressive left, from the hippie communes, as part of kind of the rebellious era of the 1960s. Parents just not sending their children to school and teaching them on in these co-op communities. And then throughout the 1980s, the modern homeschooling movement expands mostly in that case through the religious right, focusing on pulling their children out of schools for homeschooling. And it was really the conservative right that provided kind of the legal infrastructure and momentum to really fully recognize homeschooling rights. Again, that happened fully by the mid 1990s. So 1999 was the first year that the US government began tracking homeschoolers in the
Hmm.
federal database. They counted 850,000 homeschoolers that year. Um, just before the pandemic, we were just under 2 million homeschoolers. Again, these numbers are very likely undercounted because homeschoolers, I think, notoriously tend not to be included or not choose to be included in some of these government surveys, but somewhere around 2 million. Other estimates suggest closer to 2.5 million. But with the advent of the pandemic specifically the school shutdowns, the number of independent homeschoolers in the US has more than doubled to nearly 5 million. So just in really, a 10-month period, from March to the fall, there were, close to 5 million students who were pulled from their public schools or not enrolled in the first place in kindergartens, and were registered as independent homeschoolers. So they had no connection to their school or to their district. In that period of time, you also saw a real increase in support for school choice mechanisms. So, Real Clear Opinion Research conducted a survey in the fall where they found that the support for school choice among parents, among respondents of the survey, increased 10% just from April to October, to about 77% of survey respondents saying that they supported school choice policies. And in fact, you're now seeing that support turn into action, legislation in a lot of states pushing for more of these school choice policies, such as education savings accounts, tax credit scholarship programs, vouchers, and so on.
So fast forwarding a little bit to the pandemic age that we've been in. So you had the spring 2020 semester, and then fall 2020, and then now into the spring 2021 semester, school semesters. You have a lot of schools closed to in-person instructions. A lot of schools only offering remote learning or some combination of the two. Taking that another way, has this been the largest scale sort of free trial for homeschooling that a lot of parents have ever enjoyed?
Certainly since before the advent of the compulsory schooling statutes that were implemented in the mid 19th century, that's the case. Just record numbers of homeschoolers over the past year. Many of these families will be temporary. I think once things get back to normal and schools reopen fully for in-person learning, many of these nearly 5 million independent homeschoolers will head back into a conventional classroom, but not all of them. I think for a lot of families, this was the catalyst they needed to try something else. I heard from a lot of families, particularly during the spring school shutdowns, that said, "Gosh, I've always wanted to try independent homeschooling, but I lacked that trigger. I lacked that, momentum to get going, and this really provided that opportunity." And I've pulled my kid from their district school, and we're, pursuing their interests and gathering online resources and really cultivating, curating a curriculum experience for them that makes sense and that's individualized, and it's working great. And so I think that's really been a discovery for a lot of families. And one of the things that I've said all along, particularly as these opinion polls that began last April and sort of continued over the following subsequent months with EdChoice running polls, USA Today, Ipsos polls, Real Clear Opinion Research polls showing parental support for homeschooling had increased since the start of the pandemic response. I said, "Gosh, if you think this is good, if homeschooling under these conditions is appealing to you, just wait until communities really get back to normal. Homeschooling so much better." I know, here where I am in the Northeast, our libraries are still closed in many cases for in-person browsing. Museums in Boston just reopened a couple of weeks ago. So, it's still been very much locked down in many parts of the country, and not at all kind of that immersive learning experience that homeschoolers are accustomed to. So if homeschooling's okay during the pandemic, and it's, parents think it's going well, or as well as can be expected, just wait until things open up and you can finally get back into your communities again in a meaningful way.
Well, we'll wrap with this before we take our first commercial break. I think they say what's the phrase that necessity breeds innovation. That I think a lot of parents kind of had the attitude of, well, I'm not content with my local schools or public education, but I just can't homeschool. Maybe they work, or they personally feel inadequate, that, oh, I'm not a professor, therefore I can't teach my kids, or let the experts be the ones that are in charge of education, because that's just not my cup of tea, or some level of being intimidated by the whole process. But of course, then again, the future is now. I feel like with practically anything, technologically speaking or otherwise, it's never been easier to do more things oneself. And so, do you feel like that, kind of circling back to the silver linings here, is that the silver lining being that since so many parents had no option, they were forced to figure out a way to, go to the schools in the afternoons, pick up their workbooks, log their kids into, to some website or another, because the school was only offering remote learning. And then maybe the silver lining here being is that they've gotten that in-person, sort of their own in-person instruction of, hey, I can do this. This isn't as hard as I thought it was, or maybe in the year 2000 this would have been impossible, but in the year 2021, all of a sudden, oh, yeah, I can do this after all.
I think that's right. I think one of the things that the pandemic response has done is really smashed the stereotypes of homeschooling. So much of these stereotypes were really a caricature of homeschooling that never really existed. this idea of, a parent, typically a mom, sitting around a kitchen table with a whole curriculum and kids, dutifully replicating school at home and
Sure.
going through the motions of this kind of one room schoolhouse in your kitchen, was much more the exception than the rule in homeschooling circles for decades. And so I think most families really started to realize that. And as you say, it's certainly true with all of the technological advancements that have occurred. There are so many online learning resources. I have a blog post up at the Cato Institute that I put up shortly after the school shutdowns last spring, looking at all of the incredible free online learning resources available to families. One of the gold standards would be Khan Academy, which is kind of the leader in online video-based tutorials. They're known particularly for their math videos. It's used in many schools throughout the country. It's all, again, free on a whole, panoply of topics. They really boosted a lot of their curriculum offerings, providing kind of lesson plans for the day and different strategies for making learning work. So I think families discovered that there are these incredible, either free or in some cases low cost learning resources. So it's not up to the parents to be sitting around the kitchen table teaching their kids. Many of us as homeschooling parents, both spouses will work. You have a lot of single parents that also homeschool, and they do it because they have these access to these resources and these online learning opportunities, as well as, of course, in normal times, access to classes and mentors and workshops and so forth in the broader community.
On that note, guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We will be right back with more from Carrie McDonald right after this. Don't go away. If you're enjoying tonight's show, consider supporting the program by becoming a member of our Patreon. That's over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley. Guys, welcome back to the show. We're back here again with Carrie McDonald from FEE. Carrie, so we were talking just there in between the break. Kind of given the state's sort of obsession with controlling education, why do you think that they've been so slow to get kids back in school?
Yeah, I mean, I think many of the signs point to the influence of teachers' unions. So there's been several studies done over the fall, beginning with a study done by Corey DeAngelis at the Reason Foundation, and then a further study done by Brown University researchers finding the same thing, that in areas where teacher union influence was the strongest, district schools were less likely to open for in-person learning than in districts where you had lower influence of the teachers' unions. And that's really played out. It's really not been about science. It's not been about COVID cases or deaths. It's really the influence and strength of teachers' unions in those areas. Interestingly, as a side, the Brown University study also found that competition with private schools played a big role in school reopenings as well. So teacher union strength was certainly the biggest indicator, but the researchers also found that in counties that had a large percentage of Catholic schools and private schools in general, Catholic schools in particular, have been more likely to open for in-person learning than district schools. In those counties with that large percentage of Catholic schools, district schools were more likely to reopen for in-person learning simply to compete. And we know this from school choice more broadly, that competition from private schools, from private education, really does cause district schools to up their game.
Well, so I kind of want to circle back a little bit because there's a term that we've used on the program that I haven't point blank asked you for a definition of. So for people that are unfamiliar, what is unschooling?
Yeah, so in my book, I define unschooling as not replicating school at home. So if we think of kind of traditional again, stereotypes of homeschooling. It would be simply taking the kind of curriculum and expectations and grade levels and testing and all of that that we would experience in a conventional school and simply transplanting it into one's home. And in the unschooling book, I really try to say, schooling is one method of education, but it's not the only one. And it might not be the preferred one for the realities of the 21st century. As again, we mentioned earlier, just the technological innovation and all of the knowledge and resources at our fingertips makes for a model of education that's much more dynamic, to be more preferable for today's young people. And so I really, use unschooling as sort of being able to separate education from schooling, regardless of where that schooling takes place, whether it's in a conventional classroom or in one's home, and to see education as much broader than just schooling. And again, I think technology really makes that possible. One of the other things that and really my motivation in writing the Unschooled book was also to highlight the education entrepreneurs that have been building these alternatives to school that focus on self-directed education, passion-driven learning, really focused on encouraging young people to find their passion and purpose, and not sort of be caught in this standardized learning model that we've seen. And so I was able to, travel across the country and interview many of these education entrepreneurs. In most cases, these were people who were former public school teachers who became so disillusioned by what they saw in the classroom that they left to create self-directed learning centers or homeschool resource centers or self-directed schools like the Sudbury model of schooling that focuses on this kind of unschooling approach, really focuses on kind of passion-centered learning. So that was really interesting as well. And then I was also able to interview alumni of this approach to learning and find out, what it meant for them and what they're doing now. And in most cases, really just positive experiences all around.
Well, you mentioned entrepreneurship, and when I think of entrepreneurship, it's sort of synonymous with individualism, with self-starter and critical thinking and that sort of thing. And I feel like that there's an impression that Education Inc. has sort of evolved away from teaching critical thinking, kind of the old storybook. We teach how to learn, not what to learn. People feel like that's not really true anymore in public schools, and they're mostly just memorizing facts. Do you feel like that there's a basis for that view?
Well, I mean, I think since the passage of the No Child Left Behind legislation at the turn of the millennium, there has been much more of a focus on kind of standardized learning. I mean, education, schooling was always very standardized and focused on conformity and obedience, but that's really accelerated over the last couple of decades, where this kind of test-driven learning and one size fits all kind of core competency model across the country, has really pushed us even further from any remnants of kind of individualized learning that may have existed prior to the dawn of the 21st century. And I think that's where a lot of families are saying, wait a minute, this is even worse than it was when I went to school. There has to be a better way. And they're looking for these alternatives. I will say, one other thing that I think is an interesting tidbit on this entrepreneurship theme is that the person who wrote the foreword to my Unschooled book is Dr. Peter Gray, who's a psychology professor at Boston College and an advocate for unschooling and self-directed education. He wrote a book called Free to Learn that digs into a lot of the kind of evolutionary psychology and biology of this way of learning. But he and one of his colleagues, Gina Riley, did a research study of grown unschoolers, again, people who learned outside of a conventional classroom in this more self-directed way that I'm describing. And he found, a lot of interesting discoveries about these grown unschoolers, but the one that I think is most interesting and relevant is that more than half of these grown unschoolers were working as entrepreneurs in adulthood, in careers that were tied to interests that they developed in childhood or adolescence, and of course had the freedom and autonomy to explore and to build upon. And I think that's just such a testament to not only the ways that conventional schooling can stifle creativity and imagination and entrepreneurship and an individual spirit, but also that when we can free our children from some of those methods and models of learning, that we can really encourage all of that ingenuity and human flourishing.
Well, I'm going to ask you kind of a salesmanship question here. So, our friend Brian Kaplan was on the show not too long ago, and we talked a little bit about social desirability bias, which is it kind of like an explanation of how a lot of individuals can have very negative personal experiences with the public school system, and yet at the same time, a lot of those same people will still support funding and expansion of government schools, kind of because they want there to be good schools. They know they're not, but they wish there was. And my addendum to that is something I like to call the power of the status quo, which is, a skeptic might be willing to excuse a great many failings of the system because it's just the way things are. And yet that same person will be sharply critical of educational alternatives like homeschooling for having even a single perceived failing. So how do you overcome that when you're trying to reach brand new audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point around, why do people still support government schooling when they know that there are so many failures, that it's ballooned in expenditure over the last certainly half century with lackluster results, in many cases, very poor results. And I think a lot of it is like you're saying, it's that they attach themselves to the status quo. Many of these, taxpayers went to school, and it's all they know. And so I think part of the issue is just explaining that there are other ways to learn, that private education, broadly speaking, can be much more successful for young people, as it is in all other areas of our lives. You mentioned Corey DeAngelis earlier, at that you've talked with him before. He's at the Reason Foundation. He often talks about linking kind of district schools to the analogy of grocery stores. That imagine if you were assigned your kind of neighborhood grocery store that you had to shop in based on your zip code. And we would think that's preposterous. We value our private grocery stores to deliver the kinds of food services that we want. And yet we tolerate it every day in our communities with district schooling that is government monopoly, government run, government funded, government controlled. And so I think we just need to start really pushing a little bit, pushing people to realize, look, government schooling isn't successful in many cases. It's extremely costly. We can do it much cheaper and better in the private sector, as we can with so much of our other parts of our lives.
I do want to say really quickly, so we've had Connor Boyack on the program, who's a great disciple of John Taylor Gatto. We've had Brian Kaplan on the show, and now we've had the Carrie McDonald on the show. We have not had Corey DeAngelis on the show. So Corey, and by the way, I've sent Corey a message. So Corey, if you're listening, Carrie says she's going to write a hit piece about you if you don't answer me, and come on, it's too late.
Oh yeah, no, Corey's great, and really one of the leading lights in terms of advocating for school choice across the country, and certainly education alternatives as well.
Well, I'll ask you that one final serious question, since you had mentioned school choice. I think talking more to kind of to our more libertarian or anarchist audience that we might have. Not that any of those crazy people would listen to this show. But I think some of those people sometimes fall prey to this idea that, well, I want government out of education, and I don't want anything in between. I'm not willing to take any steps between there and here. I want no state involvement in education. And so because of that, maybe they're a bit reluctant to become politically involved and support initiatives that move the needle in that direction. Because I see Corey make posts all the time about, oh, look at these different states that are introducing bills to fund, students instead of systems, as he puts it. What do you say to people that, ideologically they're on our team? They approve of educational choice and school choice and opportunities, and they believe that the parent is ultimately responsible for educating their child, but they balk at political movements that maybe are sort of half and halves, that don't necessarily defund school systems or attack the status quo so much as open up other choice. What do you say to some more of our people that maybe sort of trip over their own feet in that regard?
Yeah, it's such a great and important question. I'm often asked if I could wave a magic wand in terms of education change, what would I do? And the first thing that I would do is eliminate all compulsory schooling statutes. It's these compulsory schooling laws that exist in every state and have since the mid 19th century that give the government the power to have this oversight of education, to define standards, including in private education in many states as well. So, if we eliminated compulsory schooling statutes, it would unleash a host of innovation, all kinds of opportunities for education entrepreneurs and for families and for educators to build new learning models separate from the state without that government intervention and control. Without the elimination of compulsory schooling statutes, what do we do next? So the next best thing I would say, and I think we've seen it very much so in the last year, is parents need to exit the system themselves. And we're seeing this again with the exodus from public schools in many states, public school enrollment really dropping dramatically in the majority of US states since the school shutdowns. And these parents are flocking to private education, including private and parochial schools that have been open for in-person learning or independent homeschooling, as I've mentioned. So that trend needs to continue, that really the power rests with parents, that if they leave the system, not only does that weaken the government system and the monopoly power of the government system, but it also prompts new entrepreneurs to build new models that expand opportunity at all kinds of price levels and different philosophies of learning and so on. There's all kinds of learning models that could sprout with that kind of continued exodus from government schooling. So then the final thing is, well, what do we do in the meantime, or to kind of accelerate the disruption of the government monopoly system? And I think that's where, these school choice policies come into play. And you're absolutely right that there is some ambivalence about these school choice policies, because in many cases they are still government funded, but in most cases it means that programs are not government run the way they are with existing district schooling. So if you think of a voucher program, it's taxpayer money, certainly, but it's being used at private education facilities, schools or learning centers and that sort of thing. The same thing with education savings accounts that are similar to vouchers, although they have a much more expansive definition of education. So it's not just schooling, which is what I like. It could include tutoring. It could include books and computers and curriculum resources. And it could include tuition at a private school, but it's much broader than just that. And then, one thing that I think, one policy that I think libertarians could certainly appreciate are these tax credit scholarship programs where the money never actually enters the coffers of the Department of Revenue in your state, that you simply get a tax credit if you donate to one of these nonprofit scholarship granting organizations in your state that then distributes these scholarships to typically income eligible students in that state to use at various private education programs. So, from a libertarian perspective, the tax credit programs, are probably most appealing. But in any case, all of these school choice mechanisms really do try to disrupt the current dominant monopoly system of government schooling in a way that provides much more choice for families.
Okay, Carrie, before we forget, where can people go to follow you and learn a little bit more about unschooling?
Sure. Visit me at fee.org, the Foundation for Economic Education,
Mm-hmm.
fee.org/Kerry, Kerry. That's my website. There you go. There are all the links to my social media accounts. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter at Fee and see all my latest articles.
All right, we're going to get you out of here on this one. Now, everybody who watches this show knows that, of course, a hot dog is a sandwich. It's a meat between buns. That's a sandwich. But let me go a little bit further on hot dogs. Is a slice of bologna just a flat hot dog?
I don't know. I am stumped by that one. But I will say that the best hot dogs are the Fenway Franks here at Fenway Park in Boston.
Well, there you go. I'm not going to argue with that. I don't want to get into a food war with such an awesome guest. Carrie McDonald, thank you so much for being on the show. This was wonderful. You'll have to come back and visit again.
Oh, I'd love that. Thanks, Alan.
Guys, we will be right back to finish up the show after this break. Don't go away. Hi guys, it's Alan here, and I want to take a moment to let you know about one of our supporters who started a new business. Laura Moreau sells 50 different health and wellness all-natural products, from weight loss, supplements, energy enhancers, body toning, longer and stronger hair, and so much more. Do you like coffee? Well, they even have coffee that'll help you drop some pounds, and who doesn't want to drop a few pounds? Go check her out at her online store at lauramoreau.itworks.com today. That's lauramoreau.itworks.com. Like us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/AlanMosleyTV. You can follow me on Twitter. That's twitter.com/AlanMosleyTV. Subscribe to our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/AlanMosleyTV. Guys, also don't forget, we're also on Odyssey. Don't just complain about big tech and then do nothing about it. Odyssey is a fantastic decentralized platform. You go to odyssey.com/@AlanMosleyTV to see our whole library and every weekly episode. Thanks again so much to Carrie McDonald for a fantastic interview. Education is a passion of mine. I know it's a passion of hers. I hope it's a passion of yours as well if you believe in liberty. Guys, thank you so much. We will see you next week.